On August 1st, 1966, the University of Texas at Austin became the site of one of the first mass school shootings in the United States. The attacker, Charles Joseph Whitman, was a 25-year-old student and former U.S. Marine. Earlier that morning, Whitman killed his mother and wife at their home. He then made his way to the university's main building, bringing several firearms and ammunition. Whitman carried a Remington 700 rifle, a carbine, a shotgun, and multiple pistols, along with large amounts of ammunition. He climbed to the 28th floor observation deck of the campus tower, which stood 231 feet above ground. At 11:48 a.m., he began firing down at students, faculty, and bystanders. For the next 90 minutes, he shot indiscriminately at people walking across campus and on the nearby street known as the Drag. During his attack, Whitman killed 15 people on and around the campus. Among his victims was a pregnant woman whose unborn child did not survive. Counting the killings of his mother and wife, the death toll reached 18. 31 others were injured in the shooting. Despite the danger, police officers, university guards, and armed civilians worked together to contain the threat. They made their way to the top of the tower and confronted Whitman. He was shot and killed by law enforcement about 96 minutes after the attack began, ending the rampage. Investigations into Whitman's state of mind revealed a pecan-sized brain tumor pressing against his amygdala, the region that helps control emotions and impulses. Experts debated whether the tumor influenced his violent behavior, though no clear conclusion was reached. On July 18, 1984, a McDonald's restaurant in San Ysidro, San Diego, became the site of the deadliest mass shooting in the United States at the time. The perpetrator, James Oliver Huberty, was 41 years old and armed with multiple weapons. At around 4 p.m., he entered the restaurant carrying a Uzi rifle, a 9mm Browning pistol, and a 12-gauge pump-action shotgun. He also carried hundreds of rounds of ammunition. Once inside, Huberty ordered patrons to the ground and then opened fire. For 77 minutes, he shot at customers and employees without distinction. At times, he fired at people outside, including a passing fire truck. His victims included men, women, children, and elderly individuals. The massacre left 21 people dead, including an unborn baby, and injured 19 others. One of the wounded later died from their injuries. Survivors described hiding in closets, storerooms, or behind furniture while others attempted to flee. Law enforcement arrived quickly, but initially went to the wrong McDonald's location. Within 10 minutes, they surrounded the correct building. Officers established positions and held back as Huberty continued fighting. A police sniper stationed on a nearby rooftop eventually took the decisive shot, striking Huberty in the chest and killing him, which ended the bloodshed. Huberty had a history of mental health struggles, unstable employment, and growing frustration with society. The day before the shooting, he told his wife he intended to hunt humans. Earlier, he had even contacted a mental health clinic, but he did not receive proper support. On April 20th, 1999, Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, became the site of one of the most infamous school shootings in American history. Two students, Eric Harris, aged 18, and Dylan Klebold, aged 17, carried out a carefully planned attack that they had been preparing for nearly a year. Their plan was to begin with powerful bombs set in the school cafeteria during lunchtime. These were meant to kill hundreds of students instantly, but the bombs failed to detonate. When the plan collapsed, they switched to firearms and began shooting at their classmates. The attack left 13 people dead, including 12 students and 1 teacher. 23 others suffered gunshot wounds, and 3 more were injured in the chaos while trying to escape. Years later in 2025, one of the injured victims died due to complications related to the wounds, which added to the tragic death toll. The attackers carried a wide range of weapons, including sawed-off shotguns, semi-automatic rifles, pistols, and several homemade explosives, although most of the bombs did not go off. Much of the violence took place in the school library, where Harris and Klebold killed 10 students, before ultimately taking their own lives. The police response to the attack drew heavy criticism. Officers surrounded the building, but did not immediately enter the library, leaving victims inside without help for hours. The Columbine massacre had a long-lasting impact on American society. It triggered widespread discussions about gun access, bullying, violent video games, and the mental health of young people. It also led to major changes in how schools and police prepare for active shooter incidents, including the adoption of new rapid response tactics. On April 16, 2007, Virginia Tech University in Blacksburg, Virginia, was struck by the deadliest mass shooting carried out by a single individual in U.S. school history. The attacker was Sung-Hui Cho, a 23-year-old senior student. Over the course of that morning, he killed 32 people and wounded 17 others before taking his own life. The attack began at a dormitory where Cho shot 2 people. After leaving the scene, he returned to his room, gathered more ammunition, and then moved to Norris Hall, a classroom building. He chained the door shut and left a note suggesting there were bombs to deter entry. Once inside, Cho began a methodical assault on students and faculty members. Armed with 2 handguns, he carried nearly 400 rounds of ammunition. Witnesses recalled how Cho entered classrooms, scanned for targets, and then opened fire for trapped students and professors. Some victims attempted to block doors with desks, while others tried to help classmates escape through windows. In one act of bravery, a professor used his body to hold a classroom door shut, allowing many students to escape, though he was killed in the process. Cho remained silent as he moved between rooms, killing with chilling precision. Investigations revealed that Cho had a long history of mental health struggles. In 2005, he was deemed a danger to himself in order to undergo psychiatric treatment, but the follow-up was inconsistent. Despite continued warning signs, little action was taken by the university or authorities to intervene. On November 5, 2009, Fort Hood, a U.S. Army base near Killeen, Texas, became the site of one of the deadliest mass shootings ever on an American military installation. The shooter was Major Nidal Malik Hassan, an Army psychiatrist. Early in the morning, Hassan entered the Soldier Readiness Processing Center, a facility where soldiers prepare for deployment, and began firing at people there. His first victims were unarmed soldiers and civilians, waiting for medical or deployment processing. Hassan was armed with an FN-57 semi-automatic pistol and hundreds of rounds of ammunition. In total, 13 people were killed and 32 others wounded. Among the dead were soldiers who had just returned from or were about to deploy to Afghanistan. The attack stunned the nation because it happened at a secure military base. Authorities had been aware of some warning signs, including communications between Hassan and extremist figures overseas. However, those warnings did not lead to action that prevented the shooting. Immediately after opening fire, Hassan engaged in shootouts with military police and base personnel who confronted him. During one of those confrontations, he was shot and paralyzed from the waist down. He was arrested and taken into military custody. During his 2013 court-martial, Hassan was convicted on 13 accounts of premeditated killing and 32 counts of attempted premeditated killing. He was sentenced to death under military law. Prosecutors argued that the attack was driven by ideological extremism, especially Hassan's opposition to U.S. involvement in wars in the Middle East. On July 20th, 2012, a mass shooting occurred during a midnight screening of the film The Dark Knight Rises at the Century 16 Theater in Aurora, Colorado. The gunman was James Egan Holmes, age 24. Before the shooting, he had booby-trapped his apartment with explosives and incendiary devices. Holmes began his attack by releasing what appeared to be tear gas grenades inside the theater, then opened fire on the audience. The attack killed 12 people, plus an unborn child, and wounded about 70 others. He was quickly arrested outside the theater. Local police arrived shortly, and he did not attempt to flee far. When authorities cleared his apartment the next day, bomb squad units found homemade explosive devices. These were defused. Holmes confessed to the shooting, but later pled not guilty by reason of insanity. During his trial, Holmes was convicted of 24 counts of first-degree killing, 140 counts of attempted first-degree killing, and 1 count of possessing explosives. Due to juror disagreement, the death penalty was not applied. He received a sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. On December 14, 2012, Newtown, Connecticut faced one of the most heartbreaking tragedies in American history. The shooter, Adam Lanza, was 20 years old at the time. He began by killing his mother, Nancy Lanza, in their home. He then drove to Sandy Hook Elementary School, which served children in kindergarten through 4th grade. Armed with a semi-automatic rifle and 2 handguns, Lanza arrived at the school just after 9:30 a.m. He shot through a locked glass door to enter, carrying hundreds of rounds of ammunition stored in high-capacity magazines. Once inside, Lanza immediately opened fire in the front office and lobby. He then moved into classrooms where young children were gathered. Within minutes, he killed 20 children, all of them only 6 or 7 years old, along with 6 adult staff members who attempted to protect them. At approximately 9:40 a.m., Lanza ended the attack by taking his own life. Including his mother, 27 people died, and 2 others were injured but survived. Investigations later revealed that the firearms had been legally purchased years earlier by Lanza's mother. On the morning of the attack, he destroyed his computer hard drive, which made it difficult for authorities to understand his planning in detail. While he had a history of mental health issues, no single diagnosis could explain his decision to carry out the massacre, and his exact motive remains undetermined. The massacre horrified the world, especially because of the younger age of the victims. The event brought intense national conversations about gun laws, mental health services, and the risks of high-capacity firearms. Families of the victims later sued the gun manufacturer, arguing that the weapon's design contributed to the scale of the killings. The lawsuit ended in a settlement worth tens of millions of dollars. In the aftermath, conspiracy theorists spread false claims that the shooting was staged, which led to lawsuits and defamation rulings against them. Sandy Hook remains one of the most defining moments in modern discussions on school safety, mental health, and firearm legislation in the United States. On June 17, 2015, Charleston, South Carolina was the site of a mass shooting fueled by racial hatred. Dylan Roof, a 21-year-old white supremacist, targeted Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church, a historic black congregation with deep roots in American history. That evening, at around 9:05 p.m., Roof entered the church during a Bible study session. He carried a .45 caliber Glock handgun and ammunition, and after sitting with the group for a short time, he began shooting. Roof killed 9 African American worshipers, whose ages ranged from 26 to 87. Among the victims was Clementa C. Pinckney, the church's pastor and a South Carolina state senator. The massacre shocked the nation not only because of the number of lives lost, but because it happened in a place of worship, a setting meant to offer refuge and peace. Roof's actions were rooted in extremist ideology. He had consumed large amounts of white supremacist propaganda online and wrote a manifesto describing his belief in a coming race war. He admitted he chose the church specifically because of its significance to the black community. Roof was arrested the following day. His trial resulted in convictions on numerous charges, including federal hate crimes, obstruction of religious exercise, and possession of a firearm during a crime of violence. He received the death penalty in federal court, becoming the first person in U.S. history sentenced to death for a federal hate crime. On June 12, 2016, the Pulse nightclub in Orlando, Florida, became the site of one of the deadliest mass shootings in American history. The attack was carried out by Omar Mateen, a 29-year-old security guard who entered the nightclub shortly after 2 a.m. while it was hosting its popular Latin night. The club was packed with patrons, many of them members of the LGBTQ and Latino communities, when Mateen opened fire with a semi-automatic rifle and a handgun. The initial gunfire created immediate chaos as people rushed to escape. Some patrons tried to flee through the dance floor, while others hid in restrooms and closets. Mateen moved through the club, continuing to shoot, while survivors desperately called 911 for help. During the standoff, Mateen himself contacted emergency dispatchers and pledged allegiance to the leader of ISIS, claiming that his actions were motivated by U.S. military activity in the Middle East. Police arrived quickly and surrounded the building, exchanging fire with the attacker. For several hours, negotiations took place, as some victims were trapped inside with Mateen. Eventually, authorities decided to breach the building, leading to a final gunfight in which Mateen was killed. 49 people were killed, not including the shooter, and more than 50 were wounded by gunfire. Others were injured in the scramble to escape or from broken glass and debris. Orlando hospitals were overwhelmed with casualties, and medical staff worked through the night to save as many lives as possible. The Pulse shooting drew global attention to the vulnerability of LGBTQ spaces, the continuing debate over gun control, and the risks of radicalization. Vigils and memorials were held worldwide, and in Orlando, the site became a place of mourning and remembrance. On October 1st, 2017, the Las Vegas Strip witnessed the deadliest mass shooting committed by a single individual in United States history. The attack took place during the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival, where approximately 22,000 people had gathered for an outdoor country music concert. The perpetrator, 64-year-old Stephen Craig Paddock, had checked into the Mandalay Bay Hotel days earlier. From a suite on the 32nd floor, he stockpiled dozens of firearms and large quantities of ammunition. On the night of the concert, Paddock smashed the windows of his hotel room to create firing positions overlooking the festival grounds. At 10:05 p.m., he began shooting into the crowd below, using rifles equipped with rapid-fire modifications that allowed him to fire at an alarming rate. The assault lasted roughly 10 minutes, during which Paddock fired over 1,000 rounds. Concertgoers were caught completely off guard. Many dropped to the ground, while others ran for cover as bullets struck from above. The scene quickly turned chaotic, with hundreds injured not only by gunfire, but also by the stampede as thousands attempted to escape. By the time police reached the hotel room, Paddock had taken his own life. The death toll eventually reached 60 victims, with more than 800 others injured, including hundreds with gunshot wounds. Emergency rooms across Las Vegas were overwhelmed, forcing doctors and nurses to work under extreme pressure. Despite an exhaustive investigation, law enforcement never identified a clear motive for the attack. Paddock did not leave behind a manifesto or clear explanation, and officials concluded that his reasons may never be fully understood. On February 14, 2018, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, became the scene of a devastating school shooting. Nicholas Cruz, a former student, did the attack. He was 19 years old. Before arriving at the school, he was dropped off by an Uber driver at approximately 2:19 p.m. Cruz was carrying a backpack and a rifle case. In those items, he had an AR-15 style semi-automatic rifle and multiple magazines. He entered Building 12 on campus at about 2:21 p.m. Building 12 had 3 stories and about 30 classrooms. Many students were still in class. Cruz first assembled his weapon at the base of a stairwell. Soon after, he moved into a hallway on the first floor and opened fire on students. He killed 3 students immediately in that hallway. He then proceeded to shoot through classroom windows, killing 6 more students and wounding 13 others. 2 teachers were also killed on the first floor. Cruz then moved to the second floor for a brief time, fired without hitting anyone, and then to the third floor, where he killed 6 students and another staff member before putting down the rifle. In total, 17 people were killed, 14 students and 3 staff, and 17 others were wounded. Warning signs had appeared before the attack. Cruz had been expelled from the school for disciplinary issues the year before. He also made statements that concerned other students and had behavioral problems. Some of his classmates and school officials feared he might do something violent. The Parkland shooting ignited a national movement among students and parents, calling for stronger gun reform, improved school security, and better systems to respond when warning signs appear. Laws changed in Florida. The shooter, Cruz, was arrested on campus grounds shortly after fleeing. In 2022, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On November 5, 2017, tragedy struck at the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas. Around 11:20 a.m., Devin Patrick Kelly, a 26-year-old man, entered the church during Sunday service. Armed with a Ruger AR, 5.56 semi-automatic rifle, along with a Glock 19 pistol and a Ruger SR-22 pistol, Kelly opened fire on the congregation, creating one of the deadliest shootings at a place of worship in United States history. history. The shooting lasted just over 10 minutes, during which 26 people were killed, including an unborn child, and 22 others were injured. The victims included men, women, and children, with ages ranging from toddlers to elderly worshippers. Among those killed was the 14-year-old daughter of the church pastor. Survivors faced lifelong consequences. For example, Chris Workman, a young church member, was shot twice and left paralyzed from the waist down. Kelly's background revealed a troubling history. During his time in the U.S. Air Force, he was court-martialed and convicted of domestic violence after assaulting his wife and stepson. Under federal law, this conviction should have barred him from legally purchasing firearms. However, due to a failure by the Air Force to report the conviction to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, Kelly was able to buy multiple weapons, including those used in the attack. Families of the victims pursued lawsuits against the government, arguing that the failure to report Kelly's disqualifying record enabled the attack. In 2021, a federal judge ruled that the Air Force was partly responsible, awarding nearly $230 million in damages to the victims and their families. On the morning of August 3, 2019, the city of El Paso, Texas, became the site of a devastating act of violence. At approximately 10:38 a.m., a 21-year-old man named Patrick Wood Crusius opened fire inside a Walmart located near the Cielo Vista Mall. His attack was fueled by far-right extremist ideology, anti-immigrant sentiment, and white supremacist beliefs, specifically tied to the Great Replacement conspiracy theory. Crusius had driven from Allen, Texas, with the deliberate intention of targeting Hispanic individuals in what he intended to be a hate crime. Armed with a WASR-10 semi-automatic rifle, he began shooting at shoppers both inside the store and in the surrounding parking lot. Within minutes, 23 people were killed and 22 others were injured. Many of the victims were Hispanic, and families shopping for back-to-school supplies were among those caught in the gunfire. Panic spread as people scrambled for cover, while others attempted to flee the building. Prior to the shooting, Crusius had posted an online manifesto that outlined his extremist views, including fears of Hispanic immigrants displacing white Americans. He referenced other mass shootings and framed his actions as part of a larger ideological structure. Crusius was arrested at the scene without further violence. Federal prosecutors charged him with 90 counts, including hate crimes and firearms violations. In February 2023, he pleaded guilty as part of a deal and received 90 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. On May 24, 2022, tragedy unfolded at Uvalde, Texas, when 18-year-old Salvador Rolando Ramos carried out a mass shooting at Robb Elementary School. Before heading to the school, Ramos shot his grandmother at home, leaving her critically injured. He then drove to the school, arriving around 11:20 a.m., armed with an AR-15 style rifle and multiple magazines. Ramos entered through a door that could only be locked from the outside, giving him direct access to the classrooms. Once inside, Ramos targeted 2nd through 4th grade classrooms. In a span of 74 minutes, he killed 19 students and 2 teachers and wounded many others. The children ranged from 9 to 11 years old, and the attack left the community shattered. Nearly 400 law enforcement officers from local, state, and federal agencies responded. However, the response was heavily criticized. Investigations found failures in leadership, communication, and tactical planning. Many officers waited outside or in hallways instead of immediately engaging the shooter, citing confusion about who was in charge and uncertainty about how to breach the classrooms. The delay allowed Ramos to continue the attack without interruption for over an hour. Border Patrol Tactical Unit officers eventually breached the classrooms and fatally shot Ramos, ending the siege. Afterward, Texas and national leaders faced intense scrutiny. Families of victims filed lawsuits, and settlements were reached, but questions of accountability continued. On October 25, 2023, the city of Lewiston, Maine, became the site of a mass shooting that left 18 people dead and 13 others wounded. The gunman was Robert Russell Card II, a 40-year-old U.S. Army reservist who had served as a firearms and grenade instructor. Card carried out the attacks in 2 public places, beginning at Just-in-Time Recreation, a bowling alley, and continuing at Shemangi's Bar and Grill. The attack began at the bowling alley during a youth league event. From there, Card drove to the bar, where a cornhole tournament was taking place for members of the local deaf community. Victims ranged in age from 14 to 76. The shooting triggered a lockdown of the entire region, as authorities urged residents to shelter in place during what became the largest manhunt in Maine's history. Card's body was found 49 hours later. He had died by taking his own life inside a trailer at a recycling facility where he once worked. Prior to the attack, Card had displayed clear signs of mental health decline, including erratic behavior and threats. He had been hospitalized after exhibiting paranoid episodes, and his family and colleagues had repeatedly warned authorities. Investigations revealed that Card suffered from traumatic brain injuries, likely linked to his military service, and repeated exposure to blast waves during training. An independent commission later concluded that law enforcement had probable cause under Maine's yellow flag law to seize Card's weapons a month before the shooting. This action was never taken. Families of the victims, along with survivors, filed lawsuits claiming that both military officials and law enforcement ignored multiple warning signs. They argued that the tragedy could have been prevented had authorities acted earlier. The Lewiston shooting also led to changes in Maine's gun laws and reopened debates nationwide on how to address both firearm access and the mental health challenges faced by veterans and reservists. Thank you very much for watching this video, and if you learned something, make sure to leave a like. Comment down below your thoughts on any of the mass shootings I discussed in this video, and subscribe if you would like to see a part 2 or more videos like this one. Thank you again, and goodbye.